G'day and welcome to Tuesday Night Live, the show where we ask all the big questions but don't take ourselves terribly seriously. My name is Andrew Sennett. Let me introduce my co-host and conversation partner, Ryan. How you going, Ryan?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too foul. Not too foul at all.
And may the 4th be with you.
Oh, yeah, that is perhaps the nerdiest thing that's ever been said on this show.
I take that as a challenge.
Yeah.
I will one-up it at some point.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it is the famous May the 4th. Is that International Star Wars Day? I love the memes that have been going around today. You know, it's May the 4th be ever in your favour, Gandalf in the Narnia books or something like that.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, let's mix up every sci-fi and
Written
fantasy
by
metaphor.
Suzanne Collins.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you do anything special on May the 4th? Do you get all your nerdy stuff out? Do you do little lightsaber
My
fights?
nerdy stuff comes out all the time in little bits.
Right.
Today's no more special, though it is my niece's birthday.
Okay.
And so I have, I always have a special connection in that way. 'Cause
Yep.
I go, she really is a Jedi.
Yeah, my little brother's birthday's May the 5th, but doesn't really impinge on things all that much. What does your wife think of all this kind of obsession with Star Wars stuff?
She tolerates it.
Okay, right. That doesn't sound terribly good.
She doesn't mind. She likes Star Wars. She loves Lord of the Rings. So we're all about that. That's not a problem.
Yep. So are there any May the 4th people out there in Chatland of YouTube? Do you think there are any people out there?
Well, we've got one who says, this is Andrew, I am the Senate.
Right.
If that's a Star Wars quote.
Oh, okay, right. People always make that comment about my name. It's spelled differently, but
It is.
okay. I just smile and nod.
It's a big meme to say I am the Senate.
Right.
Just so you know.
That's Palpatine, right?
Yeah.
The bad guy.
That's not how you say it, but yes.
Oh, it's Palpatine?
Palpatine, yeah.
Right.
Like Ovaltine.
Right, okay. I'm just going to continue to say Palpatine then.
Okay.
What does my T-shirt say? Evie asked what my T-shirt says. My T-shirt says, "Are you suggesting that coconuts migrate?" And points to the first person who can tell me where that what pulp culture moment that comes from. Are you suggesting that coconuts migrate?
Ooh. See people who know their older movies well.
Oh, it's not that old. Come on, it is in my lifetime.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I still think 20 years ago was like the 80s, but it's not.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the 80s were like 40 years ago.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
No one's got it yet.
No, yeah. Mate, do we need to give a different clue, or maybe we can keep it on for the rest of the show until someone does get it?
Yep. Are there other names that are important to pronounce correctly in is it Han Solo or Han Solo?
Oh, that is a big one. Yeah, it's definitely Han though.
It's Han, is it?
Yeah.
Right.
That is a circle of contention though.
Is it Obi-Wan or Obi-Wan?
Neither.
Obi-wannabe.
Obi-Wan. Yeah, I don't know. Obi.
Obi-wobi.
Obi-wobi.
Okay, we desperately need to move on. Nobody's got the quote. It's not from Ice Age. Ben Jensen? No. If you're watching on YouTube, though, like, subscribe, whack the notification bell, share, make a comment. All of that helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you're tuning in through the Facebook community, welcome back. As we say every week, this show is a conversation. We love your chat. It becomes part of things. If you do have something you'd like to say, add a comment, ask a question. If you add the hashtag mailbag, we'll take notice and include it in our conversation. But enough of that. Let's get into the show for tonight. And as we come back, it's to the news that somebody did get the pop culture reference. It is, yes, in fact, Caleb from the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's one of those movies where, in my generation, that was one of those movies people knew verbatim. They could do the whole thing. And there are a lot of very famous moments from that movie, like the comment, "It's just a flesh wound."
Yeah, and like, what? Is it from the scene where it's, what is your favourite colour?
Yes, that's right. That's, yes.
What is the velocity of the unladen swallow?
The airspeed, yes, the airspeed
of an unladen
swallow.
Are you African?
Afro-European. Yes. Yes. Anyway, we want to move on. We want to move on to things we find disgusting.
Oh, yeah.
What things do you find disgusting? Do you really hate?
The thing that it happened to me today.
Yep.
Funnily enough, I kicked a ball around this afternoon, and I took my shoes off and drove home, and I genuinely stood out and I stepped into a slug.
Really?
Yeah, it actually happened.
Right.
Yeah. It was disgusting. I hate it so much.
Stepping on slugs.
Yeah,
That's-
and barefooted.
Right.
Like, it's gross when it's like when you're wearing a shoe,
Yep.
but it's even worse.
Yep.
when it's that. Ellie says hairless cats.
Yeah,
Yes,
they are
look
pretty
like they've
revolting.
They look like they've been turned inside out.
Yep.
Socializing.
Yeah. Sorry, what's that? Socialising?
Natasha said socializing.
I'm with you, Tash.
We've got maggots and other small moving things.
Yeah.
Peanut butter. Cats with hair. So
Just cats.
Just cats in general, it seems like.
Who's Dr. Beeching?
I have no idea.
I won't ask.
But
Yep.
there are a couple. What's that? There's that. Is it that Swedish Swedish fish that people?
Yeah,
eat?
the fermented herring.
Yeah.
I saw a video. Did I show you that video the other day? We saw that video together the other day of the people opening trying to eat the fermented herring.
Yeah, and they just gag.
And they're gagging and retching.
I saw Hamish and Andy try and do that once.
Apparently it's illegal to open it in public places in Sweden. You have to actually apparently open it underwater.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like is it durians?
Yeah, durians. That's the other classic
yeah.
one, isn't it? That fruit that is banned on public transport in Singapore.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of different countries where they have durians with the not allowed sign.
Yeah. Have you ever eaten durian?
No, I've not.
It is a pretty angry looking fruit on the outside. It looks like it's kind of half football sized and it's kind of very craggly on the outside, so it looks a bit angry already. And when you open it up, it's bright yellow and it's got the texture of like really thick custard. And it smells like somebody's just thrown up. And then you eat it and the flavour in your mouth is like you've just thrown up in your mouth. And
So it doesn't taste good either.
And then it's got this amazing aftertaste, this kind of aftertaste like you've just thrown up.
So why do people eat it then?
I have no idea. People love it though. People have durian ice cream and all sorts of
I
things.
just assumed that it smelt bad but tasted good. Oh, that's weird. Other people have said spiders and eggplants, which I feel are very different.
Yes, they are. Yep. Anybody else's toilet?
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Anyone's,
Yeah.
Bodily things that aren't my own.
Yeah. Hair in the shower. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some good stories about that one.
Your reaction to the news of the European Super League was fairly violent as well.
That
You were
makes me
disgusted by that.
Makes me want to gag,
Yeah, and there are people that disgust us as well, aren't there? Like, I'm thinking, for me, people who speed up when it gets to double lanes on the highway. They're going slow when it's single lanes. When it gets to double lanes, they speed up. Those people.
Yeah. Manchester United fans actually stormed the field.
I heard.
I
heard.
Out of anger of not just the European Super League, but about the people who own the club and everything. So they're disgusted.
They're disgusted. It's just disgusting. It's all disgusting.
Well, we're gonna. You'll like this one though. Someone said the DC universe.
The DC universe is disgusting.
That's
Avogadro's number is disgusting. Tasteless fruit. And then someone comes up with Avogadro's number is awesome. Do you know what Avogadro's number is?
I do not know.
6.022 times 10 to the 23. The number of molecules in a mole.
Oh, there you go. That is a gross fact.
There's one thing I remember from chemistry. I did a university degree in chemistry. That's pretty much the only thing I remember.
If there's one thing you took away from it.
Yeah. It's just some random number.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I think it's time to move on.
Is it time to move on? It is time, therefore, for story time with Amelia. Let's go, Amelia.
Hey, I'm Amelia. I'm going to read from Luke's biography, a story about how Jesus responds to a distraught dad and a sick lady. This happened just after Jesus came back to land after calming the storm. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened.
Amazing, Amelia. Fantastic. I think it's fair to say that we like the idea of compassion. We find compassion in other people appealing, and we aspire to be compassionate people ourselves. And a lot of the time, compassion is pretty easy. It's easy to find compassion for our kids, at least some of the time, our friends and our family, for people we have some affinity with, even for some strangers, as long as we see them as our kinds of people. But I think we'd all admit that compassion is almost impossible for people we already don't like, or have no reason to like, for enemies, for people we find repellent, the great unwashed. The people who serve the lowest and least in our community are absolute standouts. We tend to feel pity for the outcast, but not compassion. Our pity doesn't drive us to get close and actually help them. A couple of weeks ago, we discovered the compassion of God. We saw Jesus show compassion to a grief-stricken woman, and it was incredible. I think we would have shown the same compassion if we were able to. But this story shows us the kind of compassion that God has and we don't tend to have. God enters this world and is driven to spend time with the disgusting, with the outcast, with the dirty. He gets close to them. He touches them. He embraces them. He lifts them up. And it's great, but it's not really us. This woman who comes to Jesus and touches him, she is a complete outcast in her community. Not because she's a bad person, but because she's a disgusting person. She's horrifically and untreatably unclean. She's been constantly bleeding for 12 years. 12 years. She spent all of her money seeking treatment and got nowhere, and so she's destitute. And because she won't stop bleeding, which means she probably constantly smells awful, no one will go near her. And the one group of people who stay furthest away from her are religious people who see her as religiously unclean. There is a condition that many women get in poor countries from difficult childbirth called a fistula. It's where a woman is so damaged that she constantly leaks her own faeces and urine down her legs uncontrollably. In these countries, out in the rural areas, there is no treatment, and these women become so disgusting to those around them that even their families shun them and kick them out of their villages. Most of these women die alone and friendless. That's the kind of situation this woman is in. She's alone and friendless and destitute. No one will have anything to do with her until she meets Jesus. This one encounter with Jesus turns her entire life around. Now, I think it's hard for us to imagine just how horrific her life would be and just how much of a difference meeting Jesus made to her. It was like life from the dead, no less dramatic than his encounter with the dead girl just an hour or so later. This is the compassion of God. It's not like our idea of compassion. It's not limited by how disgusting or repellent we find the other person. God is willing to love people at their very worst, at their most disgusting. This is what Christians have found in God. Not just ordinary level compassion, but compassion beyond anything we could ever expect or imagine. Because God didn't care about us and help us when we were attractive to him. No, he cared for us when we were about as attractive to him as a warm bucket of spit, as a friend of mine used to put it. This is what makes it easy to accept the love of God. I think a lot of us find God hard, too hard to come at. It feels like I have to give up so much of what makes me me to become a Christian, and I get that. But here at this moment, as he meets this woman, we see why so many people say yes to Jesus. This kind of compassion isn't rare, it's impossible. And yet we see it here in Jesus. And just a side note to end with, there was one person who had compassion on all those women who suffered from post-birth fistulas. One couple who cared for them. Catherine Hamlin and her husband Reg set up a fistula hospital in Ethiopia that has helped over 60,000 women since the 1970s. Catherine died just last year, but her work goes on saving the lives of thousands of women. And if you're Australian, you may well have heard of her. I don't think you'd be surprised to find out that Catherine was a follower of Jesus and was moved by his compassion. So Ryan, what do you think about compassion? It doesn't seem to be a very, is it a manly virtue to think about?
Or maybe not like traditionally in the older sense. Like, I feel like I think about compassion and I like to think that I can be compassionate. But I think I was thinking about what you said. Like, I feel pity for people. I may even care for people, but I don't know if I, have that drive or that feeling that makes me want to do something about it. I definitely, when I'm angry at people, I definitely don't feel compassion then. Yeah. Or when something, makes me gag a little bit, I definitely don't want to. Compassion's not the automatic feeling, I guess. For me.
Yeah, it's not definitely in my basic bag of tricks day by day. I don't go out of the house and think about compassion when I'm down the shops, down the street. Yeah. And often that's the case that even for people who are destitute, I'll often to my shame, feel disgust or I just want to get away from this situation rather than actually compassion towards them.
Do you think that that's what compassion is? So like compared to pity or care, do you think compassion has to do with the pull to do something about it or to help?
Yeah, I think compassion is something you have on someone. It's not just a feeling you feel, right? It's not just a feeling of something. It's actually, in a sense, it's pity in action. It's to take pity on, to have compassion for, and it does. It feels like it does feel like more of an emotional word, doesn't it? It feels like an investment in someone. But I wonder if that's because to have compassion on someone, particularly one of the outcast, you have to get past your natural revulsion or disgust for someone. To truly help a homeless person, to lift them up, to take them somewhere, you have to deal with their smell, with the difficulty of them, with the difficulty of their personality perhaps, if they've got mental health issues. There are things you need to actually do, and I feel like compassion is that kind of a thing. It's driving you beyond that sense of personal kind of, I wouldn't normally have anything to do with people like this. That's, after all, isn't it, the only reason you change your baby's nappies, isn't it?
Well, it's why I feel like it's why I can change my kid's nappy, but not someone else's.
Yeah.
Like at least I feel like there's something about my kid that it's easier to get over.
Yeah, I never found that whole thing terribly difficult with the kids changing the nappies, but I've seen those videos. The people with the plugs and the retching sounds.
I had that happen to me yesterday because Ezra, what did he have? He had red onion and tuna.
Right.
And that was bad.
Yeah.
That was a gagging moment.
Once they stop breastfeeding and they start eating real food, the number twos are they test you. This is the same. I think those moments. I'm a child of the 80s. I was alive in the 1980s. like many of you weren't. But I remember that 1983 was the year when AIDS became a thing. It had been kind of building before then, but 1983 was when it really became a big thing around the world. And the images of people who would touch AIDS patients, it was such a moment of fear for everyone. Everyone was so afraid of catching it, and we didn't know much about it. The image of people who touched AIDS patients who were dying were profound. That sense of compassion that drove you towards people. I remember stories. There are stories of people who leprosy was like AIDS. It was even worse because it was something you did catch by touching people. It's a horrific disease, and a lot of people used to die of it. They don't anymore now with modern treatments. But basically, getting leprosy was a death sentence, and it was a horrific death sentence because your body would slowly, basically rot as it went, and you could live for years, but just rotting away. And they would actually put these people in prison colonies, basically, walled off towns where the lepers all went and lived together. And the stories of those people who actually entered the lepers colony and took a life sentence, they were healthy people, but they did that in order to serve and help the lepers, is a profound story for me of compassion.
Yeah. You can see the difference between saying, I care for someone like that.
Oh, yeah.
Compassion for someone like that. It's much stronger.
I care. Let me throw some loose change at that.
Yeah.
Whereas compassion is actually much more direct.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't alive for her, but I remember, I hear stories and people, gasp about Princess Diana, and how when she, without gloves, touched patients with AIDS, and that was a big thing. Because that's no joke.
Yeah.
But Laura's got a question. So is there a difference between the worldly compassion that we see in people like Diana? Is there a difference between that and the God's compassion or godly compassion that we're seeing in this story? Do you think?
I think there's a difference of degree, but the actual thing itself, no. It's a good question. But I think the compassion itself, you see it, and that's why we talk about those things. There's something about the way that Lady Diana acted in those moments that showed profound compassion and that ability to actually, in a sense, take a risk in order to care for somebody else. The only difference, I think, with God is one of degree. That God's compassion is of a I don't know what you call it, a higher. It was bigger, more. He had compassion for people not just who were disgusting to him, but were his enemies. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? That sometimes we can find a pity that might drive us to compassion for people that are a bit disgusting to us, but people we hate, people who are our enemies and against us, would we find the same compassion for them?
Yeah, well, Michael's got a question that asks exactly that. He asks, how can we feel more compassion towards people we don't naturally feel compassionate towards, including enemies?
That's a great question, because in a sense it's the question of this story that this story brings up, because the issue here is that God has compassion on humanity not when they're attractive to him, not when we're sweet and we're friends and we're mates. He had compassion towards people who at the very best are apathetic towards him. And more likely, most of the time, we're hostile towards God. We resent God. We even hate God or deny him. And yet he shows compassion towards us. And it's a profound compassion. Yes, that's why, in a sense, this idea is one that has become part of our cultural awareness. Why is compassion such a powerfully good and attractive thing today? It's because of this. It's because of Jesus and the way he acted that we now think this way about being compassionate, because it wasn't natural. The world that these people lived in, the world that Jesus lived in with the people around him, the Roman Empire, was not one where compassion was a virtue. Compassion was seen as weakness. You didn't have compassion for the disgusting. You pushed them aside. You pushed them out. You had nothing to do with them. And so Jesus' actions here, showing God's compassion, is actually profoundly revolutionary and world transforming. And the reason why we look at those acts of compassion today and recognise them is because of this, because of moments like this, where Jesus transformed the way we look at things and transformed our culture and our background. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's not one that we always like, even though we tend to like the virtue. I think we find this hard, particularly when we think of God. When we think of that idea that we're disgusting to God, but we're also helpless to fix ourselves. This woman was helpless to fix herself. And so the idea here of actually having compassion is she can't fix things herself. She's in this hopeless situation. And she can't fix her own problem. She's tried, and she can't fix it. It's like the dead girl, helpless to help themselves. They need an outside fix. They need someone to have compassion on them. And as much as we kind of like the idea of compassion, we don't like that idea. We don't like to think of the idea that we might have a problem that we're unable to fix ourselves. That our lives might be things that are not things we can fix. So, yeah.
Well, then I feel like I want to ask a similar question to what Ellie is asking.
Yep.
So she asks, why, I think, is the question. Why does Jesus have compassion on his enemies, or why does he have compassion on people who, for all intents and purposes, are disgusting?
Yeah. I think that's a great question.
As they are?
Because this is the moment, isn't it? This is that famous moment that we all kind of have an awareness of. Jesus hanging on the cross, where he says, Father, forgive them; they know not what they do. Even as people nail him to the cross and kill him, he wants to show mercy to them. He wants to have compassion on them. And so, why is he like this? And that's the $64,000 question.
It's very specific.
It's an old game show pop culture reference.
Sorry.
This is the key question, isn't it? And I think it's because of what God is like. That's one of the things we're trying to actually talk about and think through on this show, is why is it that people find Jesus at the same time profoundly attractive and profoundly repulsive? And it's because this is part of who God is. The reason Jesus is like this, the reason Jesus acts like this, is because this is his nature. This is what he's like. At the heart of God is this idea of love and mercy, of compassion. And it's one of those things. We kind of like the concept when we can show it to other people. We don't like it when it might be us receiving mercy from God. We actually hate mercy because it says that we have a problem we can't fix.
Yeah. So I feel like you mentioned a bit before about how God sees us and how we a little bit are disgusting to God. I feel like I can, even saying that makes me a little bit want to squirm in my chair a little bit. Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by that and why? Yeah, I think it's important here.
I'm not sure I can illustrate it well, but the idea here is that we have made ourselves revolting to God. We've made ourselves revolting to God because we've turned our back on him. We've turned our back on the idea that our Maker has any worth to us at all, deserves anything from us at all, deserves any acknowledgement, any honour from us at all. And so we've turned our back on him in that way, but also the way we act in his world, the things that we do to one another. And you only have to just throw your eyes out a little bit and look at the kinds of things that people do to one another to see that, to see the disgustingness of the human condition. And then all you need to do is bring it back in and look in the mirror a little bit and think about the ways you've thought of other people, the ways you've treated other people in the past. We like to think we're not too bad, but we know in our heart of hearts that we're not all that crash hot, that we fail even our own standards, let alone the standards of some God out there. And I think when you actually consider the way we live and act, the things that humanity has done, the things that we ourselves have done, the things that I've done, I think it's no wonder that God's disgusted by me. And the fact that I turn my back on him and say, get stuffed, I'll live life my own way, thanks very much, just as the icing on that cake. And so the fact that God shows compassion to people like me, people who spat in his face and went their own way, is pretty profound. So he's not showing compassion to people who, they feel like they might deserve it from him. It's not that people turn around and spend their whole lives serving God hard and doing all these awesome things, and then God says, "Oh yeah, I'll be kind to you because you're my mate." No, God's actually being kind to people who aren't his mates. I think that's why it's so profoundly incredible, this kind of compassion. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It would be like your worst enemy, the person who has just crapped on you your whole life, who's made your life a misery, and you come upon them and they're suffering and you hate them and you show them mercy. We're going to come to this in a story, one of the most famous stories that Jesus ever told, in a few weeks' time. And so I'm going to save it for that week maybe, but that's what it's like.
Okay. Well, I think we'll have a short break there. We're going to have our mailbag segment in just a second, where there have been a lot of other questions that we haven't gotten to yet, but we're going to try and bring them up in this next segment. But before we do that, we're going to have a bit of a mental break, which we, almost aptly enough for today, are called toilet break. So we'll see you soon. All right, welcome back. It's time for our mailbag segment, and we're going to get straight into it. We've got 3 questions in a row that we're going to talk about, because they all kind of fit a similar theme. And the theme of that being, how does God's wrath or judgment or anger fit with this idea of his compassion? And so we're going to have them all at the same time, but we'll because we want to try and answer them because they're very similar. So the first one we can see is from Thomas. So how can one call God compassionate when he sent all the plagues to Egypt to save a people who ended up denying him? And when Babylon invaded, he did nothing. That doesn't seem so compassionate. And then we'll go to the next one. Let's go to Michael's one. So similar to Thomas's question and Ali, which we're going to show in just a second. How does God's compassion fit with his justice and not showing favoritism? And then finally, Ali's question, wasn't God super wrathful? And how is that compassion?
Yeah.
Or is that a post-Jesus thing?
Yeah.
So I don't know how you want to come at that, Seno, but...
I don't know either. These are great, but these are great questions because they raise a really big idea and a really big tension within the Christian faith. And that is these ideas of wrath and mercy, or anger and compassion. And how does it fit with this idea? People know that this idea that isn't God judgy. Doesn't God judge people for their lives? And there's a truth in that. That is... that is a God who treats us, a God who honours our humanity, holds us accountable. It doesn't honour anyone if you don't actually say to them, your life has value, your choices have value and meaning, and therefore you're held accountable for what you do. And that leads to this idea of justice and therefore judgment. God is angry with people for the way they treat him and the way they treat his world and one another. And there are, there's numerous Bible verses. That's a massive theme of the Bible, that God holds people accountable, which leads to justice, which leads to the idea of anger, that our actions make God angry in a sense. And so that is true. But at the same time, you have this idea of compassion, of forgiveness. And how do you hold these two things together? They don't seem to make sense. How can God forgive people? How can God show his enemies compassion when they deserve judgment? And I think we're aware of this when we think about the awful things that people have done. When we think about the awful things people have done, we think they should pay for their crimes. And we're right about that. People should pay for their crimes. That's justice. That's what, in a sense, makes the world make sense. And so how does the idea of forgiving people for their wrongs fit in with that? And this is the key question of the Christian faith. How do these two things meet one another? How do wrath and mercy go together in the one God? It doesn't seem to make sense. And the answer is in the God who himself shows compassion by seeking justice. And so God doesn't show compassion by ignoring justice. He doesn't show compassion by ignoring the evils that humanity have done. No, he shows compassion by addressing those evils in himself. This is where the Christian idea of the cross of Jesus comes up. Why do Christians have as their symbol a cross? Why is their symbol? Why do Christians through history hang crosses around their necks and put them up on their churches and that sort of thing? Why do they do that? Because they see at the cross God having both anger, God showing his justice and punishing the wrongs of people, holding us accountable for what we do, and at the same time showing compassion because he takes the justice himself. And so that's where how God can show both of those things. And so it's not that God used to be judgy, but now he's all friendly and nice post-Jesus. Jesus kind of shows a nice face of God. No, it's that in Jesus, God is both completely just, that he can show justice for the wrongs that we've done, and yet he can also show compassion and forgiveness for us. He can offer us forgiveness because he takes the punishment that we deserve himself. That's the why the Christian faith is such a profound thing. It's not just some religion about us doing kind of some nice religious things, or burning some kind of smelly candles, or doing weird religious dances. It's actually not about some religious performance. The heart of the Christian faith is about God and God's performance, what God does. And God is both perfectly just, he actually holds us accountable for what we do, and at the same time he shows us mercy by taking that punishment himself at the cross. That's why the Christians call that message good news or great news. And it's a fantastic question. There might be some follow-ups to that, but that is at the heart, I think, of what's coming at us from those questions.
Yeah. So the cross is the moment where God's mercy and his judgment kind of combine, overlap.
Meet, yes, and make sense.
Yeah.
See, it doesn't make sense just to forgive, right? It's all very well for me to say you're forgiven, but that forgiveness comes at a cost, doesn't it? Because I can't just sweep what you've done under the carpet. What you've done, and it deserves, crimes deserve punishment. And so if I was just to say, if God was just to say, well, it doesn't matter what you do, then it doesn't matter what Hitler did. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter what Stalin, Pol Pot and all those other horrific people did. If God just says it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what they did either. All the great evils don't matter either. And God can't be like that. He needs to say those things do matter, that my life matters and holding me accountable matters. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Hopefully we've at least begun to answer that question, but please, if there's follow-ups, we'd love to keep going. But we'll move on to the next question. We've got Michael saying, so why does Jesus call the lady daughter? I am confusion.
I think it's just a turn of phrase. Jesus is a rabbi, a teacher, and so it's a mode of operating. It's like calling someone sir. It's like calling someone child.
I don't like older British ladies call younger people like son.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. That's right. It's just I think it's just a mode of expression. Just a thing.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, next question then, from Kelly. Why doesn't Jesus still raise people? Is it because they don't just believe? Or...
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
I think what Jesus is doing by doing all the miraculous things here, and we talked about this earlier on. We talked about the idea of miracles. Is he's in a sense setting a stage, and so the miracles Jesus performs here they're not permanent. This girl he raised from the dead still died eventually, at some point. The things he did there weren't permanent, but they pointed towards something that was. And so Jesus raising this girl from the dead, the question is, why didn't he just do it to everyone in Palestine? Why did he just do it to this one girl? Well, all of the miracles that Jesus did were always very limited and specific. He didn't heal every single disease in the world when he was around. He didn't raise every person from the dead. The ones he did were pointed towards what he'd come to do. And so Jesus bringing forgiveness is in effect a raising of the dead. What Jesus promises is a life beyond the grave, a life that is the good life, the right life, life as it was meant to be lived. Life without grief, life without the awful things we inflict on other people and that they inflict on us. Life without loss. And that's a life that he promises. And what you see is it in a germ form, if you like, in these moments where he encounters people like this woman with bleeding, like this girl he raised from the dead. And those were moments where people were astonished and they turned around and they went, who is this person? What has he come to do? And that's what Jesus was trying to do with these miracles. And so the miracles themselves aren't the big thing. We tend to look at them and go, oh, that's the magic. But it's, in a sense, those are things that point towards the big thing he'd come to do, which was the cross. The moment where he actually brings forgiveness and enables life in a sense without regret.
Yeah, so he's promised this new life and all that stuff, and in which there is no pain or grief.
Yeah.
And what he's doing here, at least in part, is showing that he actually has the power to do that.
That's right. That he's the one who's come to bring these things.
Yeah, we can actually trust that he can do it when he says he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Can we go to the next question then? I think from Ali. So, why is Jesus raising people? Isn't that
problematic? Necromancy. Yes.
Yeah.
Good question. Even in ancient times, there are different forms of this. What Jesus wasn't doing was making dancing meat puppets. And so in raising this girl, he wasn't raising a corpse like a zombie. You know what I mean? He wasn't reanimating a corpse. He was, in a sense, bringing a personality back to life. And so, in a sense, that moment that we see when someone dies, where their personhood departs from them, they are just now a corpse. What Jesus is doing is not just reanimating that corpse, he's actually reuniting that person with their personhood, with their flesh, with their body. And so he's not engaging in necromancy. He's not raising... Necromancy is that idea that you raise corpses to get them to do things for you. He's actually reanimating people into the freedom of their life and their living. And so this girl who would have died a couple of weeks ago, the young man who would have been dead and gone, is actually reunited with their family, and in a sense, part of this picture of raising the dead here isn't simply that party trick of someone comes back to life. It's the reuniting them in their relationships. The mother who gets back her son, the parents here who get back their beloved daughter. These are big moments, and they're as much about relationship as they are about raising the dead.
Yeah, the woman being brought back into society.
Yeah, this is exactly right. That's why I said with her, it's life from the dead for her as well, because she's been, in a sense, like a zombie. She's been the living dead for 12 years, and so to be restored and to come back into the community is just profound for her as well. So yeah, not necromancy. It's about humanity and bringing people back into their personhood.
Great. Okay, we'll go to the next question then. So Stanley asks, how do you love someone at their worst if they haven't loved you at yours?
Well, look at God. It's a good question, but that's what God is like. That's exactly what God is like. God doesn't love people because they loved him first. And he doesn't even love people when they're indifferent to him at their first. He loves people who hated him. And that's how you find compassion for people when they haven't shown you compassion. Now, that's hard. That's really hard. A book I've got on my shelf that I read several years ago now is a book called Forgiving Hitler, written by a Jewish woman who lost her whole family in the death camps and who came to a moment where she forgave the one who perpetrated that against her. Now, she had no redress. She couldn't get justice from him. So she just had to... She forgave him from herself.
Wow.
I've disappeared. I'm still here.
Oh, sorry. I pressed the wrong button.
Yeah, you pressed the wrong button and then you leaned over. I don't know if you noticed, mate, but you're you're leaning at a shot. I'm talking. I'm going, what's going on here?
Sorry, my bad. My bad. Just trying to figure something out.
That's going in the end of year, the blooper reel.
Oopsie.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And so I think that's a really good question, but the answer is actually to look at God himself, because that's what God does.
Good. All right, we'll go to the next question, which is from Lachlan. So why does the fact she's bleeding make her unclean? So what is religiously unclean? You mentioned that before.
Well, I tried to make this point with the women who suffered from fistulas, that made them unclean to their community because it made them smell. It made them disgusting to their community, and their community, they were literally kicked out of their homes and out of their families and out of their villages because they were so revolting to people. And this woman who's bleeding constantly would have been revolting to people. That would have been disgusting. She would have smelled awful. And so there's that sense. But yes, you're right. She was also religiously unclean. So that made her, for a religious community, that gave them an excuse, I think, to shun her, because she was also unclean in a religious sense. And so there were lots of things that made you unclean. Some diseases and bleeding and those sort of things tended to make you unclean. Death made you unclean. So in a sense, both of these young women here, the woman who'd been bleeding and the young girl, were both unclean. One was dead, the other one was bleeding. Yeah. Okay.
I think we've only got time for one more question. So we're going to bring that out now. It's from Jess. So how does power just go out of Jesus? So surely he was aware that she was going to do that. Like, is he all-knowing? Like, if he, otherwise...
I don't know. It's a good question. I asked that question myself. I don't know. I think this is a phenomenon of... I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
Is Jesus all-knowing, though?
Yeah, but in a sense, it's a moot point. He wasn't self-aware about this. I guess you can say ultimately he was in control of himself and knew what was going on, but this woman came to him and snuck up on him and touched him. So
he was in a crowd, wasn't he? So everyone was touching him.
Yeah, and that's he asks who touched me, and you can imagine the situation. There's like thousands of people pressing around him. He's like a rock star. There's people everywhere, and this woman kind of sneaks through the crowd and touches his garment. And he's going, who touched me? The disciples are going, you're kidding, right? Everybody touched you.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Everyone's bumping shoulders.
Who touched me? But why it should be for her, I don't know. It's a really good question. Got no answer to it. I'm not really sure.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. So I think we can start wrapping up.
Okay, sure. Was it a signal to me, was it?
Yeah.
Look, we're really glad you joined us tonight. And please remember to do all those YouTubey things and subscribing and clicking and commenting and all that sort of stuff. It makes a difference to all things. Keep the questions and comments coming in. We love it, and it makes for a really interesting show. Have a great week. We will see you next week.